in the tourniquet world, there's two basic types of tourniquets. There's a smooth tourniquet and a textured tourniquet. And the smooth, in general, will provide more grip for that particular patient than a textured will, because the textured has less surface area, because it has a texture like the tread on our tires of our cars. So from a healthcare professional, they have the option of choosing they want smooth or they want texture, depending on the application that they're going to be using it in for that particular patient.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this Vendor Spotlight, we speak with Nick Fruge, VP of Operations at Caresfield, and we're going to be talking about a company that distributes disposable tourniquets and has been a great example of the success of nearshoring, especially with all of the back orders that this industry has had to deal with related to supply chain over the last several years. We're going to hear that story today as Nick tells us more about this U.S.-based manufacturer, and also lots of ways to increase patient safety, simplify the process, and it's a great story around customer service as well. So we're going to be right back after a short break speaking with Nick Fruge, VP of Operations at Caresfield.
A production of 17 Studios, you're listening to Power Supply.
Joining us now is Nick Fruge, VP of Operations at Caresfield. And Nick, we're going to be talking today a lot about nearshoring, which has been a big move in the industry. We learned some lessons during the pandemic, and I know we're also going to be talking about tourniquets, disposable tourniquets, but really with this theme around the nearshoring, because the last thing that anybody wants to go through again especially in the United States when it relates to healthcare, is a shortage of supplies. And there needs to be new strategies and new ways to manage that in our industry. So I'm excited to have you on the show to talk about that today. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Justin. I'm pretty excited to be here as well. I mean, and like you said, I mean, everybody's looking for, the pandemic's really shown us how fragile our supply chains are, right?
It used to be everything that we did was just in time, and that was like the major trend, and that just got blown completely out of the water. And so before we kind of dive into this whole conversation, I thought maybe you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll talk about Caresfield as an organization as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm relatively new with Caresfield. I've been here just over 14 months now. I joined as, the organization as their director of product management. And so I'm very familiar with our disposable tourniquets and how we're manufacturing them as well. And then just recently moved into our VP of operations role. So like I said, been in the company about 14 months now. It's a very unique company, and it's partly because it's privately owned. It started about 30 years ago with Warren Griffith, who is the father of the three brothers, Ron, Steve, and Marty, that now run the day-to-day operations and then strategy for the company. They started out of Primba, North Dakota, and literally were making labels and selling consumables out of basically their garages until they could have enough space, enough revenue to have a warehouse and get their own equipment. And so it's really just grown for the past 30 years.
I love that entrepreneurial story. I mean, obviously, everything that we've done here at Power Supply is entrepreneurial and, kind of built it up off the ground from the very start. And I love stories like that because especially when you talk about families working together, I think there's just a theme of resiliency and pulling together. And that's really great. And you said it kind of started with labels, but obviously, that has expanded significantly for Caresfield over the years. Can you talk about some of the other products that they expanded into after kind of building that base and getting the warehouse and getting that strong start?
I know our salespeople would like to say that we sell everything, that's a consumable to acute care community. But the reality is we have core products that we really focus on, like our labels, for instance, like they're U.S. manufactured in our plant here in Lakeville, Minnesota, right? So that's a U.S. manufactured good that we control the quality for. We do patient ID bands as well. And a complementary product along with tourniquets is a cohesive bandage. So, these, if you ever had your blood drawn primarily blood drawn, right, is you get the tourniquet, they do the blood draw, and then they put a gauze pad on or a cotton ball and then wrap it with this bandage. That bandage is a cohesive bandage. And it's brightly colored as well, just like our tourniquets, which, I always pick a certain color because, it's my favorite color. We also do specimen transport. So that's either with a bag or with a specimen cup. And so we have both the specimen cups with the temperature strip and with a non-temperature strip on it. Labels, patient ID bands, cohesive bandages, transport bags and transport cups, and nitrile gloves as well. We also have started providing surgical gloves, surgical exam gloves, which those are sterile. Those are used in the surgery or our rooms. But yeah, we were able to provide nitrile gloves to a credible amount of our customers during the pandemic. Whoever needed it, we provided it to them. So one of those are disposable tourniquets. They're basically, in the simplest description of it, it's a rubber band that gets wrapped around someone's forearm or their upper arm when they're going to do an IV start or blood draw. And during the early 2000s, they started Caresfield, Ron and Steve, they were actually out there selling these tourniquets. And they were made from latex. They tended to be a standard latex color, which is a brownish color, or they were white. And latex allergies occur in about 12% of healthcare workers in the United States. And so there was a need in the marketplace to have something different. And there was also this terrible things that happen is that tourniquets get left on, and there's these leave-on accidents, and, patients can lose. In the worst case, they can die from sepsis. If it gets left on, in most cases, it could be nerve damage or loss of limb. So there was the two things that need to be addressed. One, the latex allergy concerns, and two, leave-on accidents. And so Ron and Steve worked with tourniquet manufacturers to develop a non-latex tourniquet. So ours is made from something that's called TPE, a thermoplastic elastomer, which there's not an allergy that we know of, at least I know of, that's related to that. So that kind of addressed the latex. And then the other thing was the leave-on accident. What can we do to help make sure these aren't left on? And they worked with the manufacturers to develop, they were the first ones to develop and sell brightly colored tourniquets. And so you think about, our stop signs are red for a reason, right? Our red lights are red for a reason because it's a visual indicator for us. So our tourniquets are bright orange, bright pink, bright yellow, bright green. It's there to be that visual indicator for the healthcare professional, to make sure, oh, I need to remove that. So that's kind of how they got into it. And they've been able to continue to grow the business from then on. The more contracts they've gotten and the more customers they've worked with, their business has kind of grown and grown and grown. And about 7 years ago, they started on this journey of nearshoring their tourniquets.
So let's talk about that a little bit more with the nearshoring, right? So you said that they kind of got their start in North Dakota, but I know that you're based in Minnesota now, your headquarters, and that's where all the labels are manufactured. And I can tell you, having worked as a nurse in the 90s, I remember we had tons of latex gloves and latex products, but the latex allergies really hit around the 2000s, and everything began to move towards non-latex. I saw that push, and I actually got my start working at a camp for disabled kids, and there was one, particular diagnosis, spina bifida, that was associated strongly with a latex allergy. So I was familiar with all of that throughout my nursing career. These leave-on accidents, I actually worked and did blood draws in the home health and hospice industry and would go into people's homes. I can't imagine leaving a tourniquet on somebody when I've done a blood draw, but you're telling me that this is a pretty significant issue in the industry. And I mean, it makes sense. If you stop blood flow, you're going to have nerve damage. I mean, oxygen is the fuel for the body's cells. I'm not surprised that there would be some serious consequences. I just can't even imagine leaving these on. Is that part of the whole brightly colored piece, is so that people don't realize that it's there? Like if it's a similar color to skin, they just visually don't recognize it. And if it's brightly colored, that helps them not leave it there because it's so obvious that the tourniquet's still on?
Exactly. I mean, that's the exact reason why they're brightly colored. I mean, there's obviously some, when we work with pediatrics and things like that, having those brightly colored tourniquets are a little bit more fun than the standard, dull blue. But that's it. I mean, if you have something that's brightly colored and let's say the hospital gown that the individual's using is blue or a light blue color or, basically any color other than, a bright neon orange, these tourniquets stick out. That's the intended purpose of it, right? Is to make sure that the healthcare professionals remember to take it off, because you've worked in healthcare, so right? Things can get busy, right? In a hospital setting, or nurses or whoever it is can just get into the flow and not remember to take off that particular tourniquet, right? They've done all the other things. They've done the blood draw, and now the gown's fallen over a portion of the tourniquet, or it happens to be the same color as the tourniquet, right?
Yeah, and in the hospital setting, a lot of these blood draws are all done first thing in the morning before breakfast, right? They want to get a blood glucose. So they're not spreading the workload. Like, you're the VP of operations, so you understand, if we can spread out the workload, we remove bottlenecks, things move very smoothly. Everybody's got a manageable workload. But when it comes to perfusion, and you're talking about blood draws, that's not the case. You have the bulk of the work is going to be done between 4:30 in the morning and 7:30. And so people are rushing is kind of my point in that regard.
Yeah, no, you're correct on that. 100%.
So as we talk about maybe some of the other purposes, you brought up the brightly colored tourniquets, but what about making a distinction between departments? What are some other common uses for the colors other than the obvious, hey, don't leave me on this patient because there could be major consequences?
Right. So some hospital systems, and that's the interesting thing about healthcare in general. There's not a lot of standardization. So each system's really left up to their own devices on how they want to write their SOPs for care and things like that. So some hospitals have said, we want only our OR to use blue tourniquets. We want only our surgery centers or labs to use orange tourniquets, or we only want the ED to use the magenta tourniquets. And they're doing that specifically so that they know if there was a leave-on accident, which department it occurred in, honestly. So that it's a way for them to help track down and then do the root cause analysis and figure out, how to resolve it. Whereas if everything's the same color, then, you don't know which department put it on, and so that could happen that way. The other reason we do it is, they might do it is just, it's a way to change the experience for the patient, right? Especially when you're thinking about pediatrics, right? You get a 6-year-old coming in, or even a 10-year-old coming in. The tourniquet that gets applied to them, you try to make that experience. Oh, look at how bright the tourniquet is, to use it as a distraction for the pediatrics patient versus, we're going to put this brown colored or white colored thing around your arm.
Yeah, you got to make it fun for the kids because it's a nerve-wracking experience. I actually remember My daughter got really sick and dehydrated one time, and we went into the hospital through the ED, and they wound up having to do a blood draw, and I promised her no needles. Big mistake on my part. I don't know how I made that mistake as a nurse, but I promised her, she was like 5. I promised her no needles, and then of course we had to have the needles. It was not a fun, it was, if anything, almost a traumatic experience for her, when we were in the ED. And I think what you're talking about is trying to make it so that it is fun. I mean, everything that they play with in terms of toys, et cetera, are brightly colored. And so that's familiar to kids. And I can see how, that would really help out. And I also know we talked a little bit about some of the options for the tourniquets. Like some of them are wider, maybe like the texture of them is different. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So we think like all of us are different sizes, right? From an infant to a pediatric patient to a grown adult, right? And even as we get older and as I start to get older, like our bodies change and our skin changes, right? Nobody likes to admit it, but that's the reality. So we have tourniquets that are designed for basically each phase of a patient's life, right? Whether they're an infant or they're, what we would call a pediatric patient, right, versus an infant. The size and the width of those tourniquets change. Same thing as we get to an adult. And then when we have larger adults, we have larger tourniquets for them. And so we think about our smallest possible patient could be like our infant, right? Maybe even a NICU. So that tourniquet is going to be, maybe a 1/4 inch wide and maybe 6 inches long, because you think about the size of that infant's arm, right? Now, let's flip that all the way over to our, we have a bariatric patient who has a larger arm. Well, that tourniquet's going to be 1.5 inches wide and maybe 32 inches long, right? And there's multiple reasons why we do this, but the simplest way to think about this is we think about nails. You nail something into the wall or nail a board together. That nail's very pointed on the end. And it's pointed because that's where all the force, all the stress, everything is concentrated in that single point. Well, when tourniquets are wrapped around someone's arm, that creates stress on that person's skin and that person's arm and their capillaries, everything. If the width of the tourniquet is too narrow, then it can roll up on the arm and be more like a rope, which is very uncomfortable for the patient.
I remember that. And if they're hairy, it rolls the hairs up too. I mean, it is uncomfortable.
Right. So that's one possibility if it's too narrow. So the other thing is if it's wide enough and it doesn't roll, then we're spreading that same stress across a larger area of that person's arm. So it's not going to pull the hair as much. It's not going to pull the skin as much. And in geriatric patients, right, this is a concern in general because their skin is thinner. And so it can, if a tourniquet's used improperly or not the correct sizing, then that patient's skin could tear as a result of using the incorrect tourniquet. So yeah, we really do have a breadth of tourniquets and sizes and lengths for, from the time you're an infant to the time that you're, a grandparent, if you want to think of it that way.
Yeah, you're right about that with the geriatric patients, though, that skin tears is like a huge concern in nursing homes and everywhere. And so I just remember working as a nurse. It's different than this, but it's the same reasoning is pressure ulcers, et cetera. Like the skin just becomes much more thin, much more brittle. And so that is a huge concern. Now, I mentioned, smooth and textured. What's the application for that?
Right. So at the beginning, I said, in the simplest form, these tourniquets are rubber bands. The reality is they're actually very complicated, both from material makeup and the texture of their surface. So if you've ever watched, any type of race car racing or motorcycle racing, doesn't really matter. The tires on those vehicles are completely smooth. There's no treads on them at all, right? Because rubber on a dry surface sticks more. You have more surface area for something to grab onto. And whereas like the tires we use on our cars today, that we have treads on them, right? And they're there to push water out of the way when we're driving on the roads so that we have more grip. Well, in the tourniquet world, there's two basic types of tourniquets. There's a smooth tourniquet and a textured tourniquet. And the smooth, in general, will provide more grip for that particular patient than a textured will, because the textured has less surface area, because it has a texture like the tread on our tires of our cars. So from a healthcare professional, they have the option of choosing they want smooth or they want textured, depending on the application that they're going to be using it in for that particular patient. So along with that, the Ron and Marty and Steve, right, they saw us like, well, why do we have to have two different types? Couldn't we have one side be textured and the other side be smooth? And they were absolutely correct. So they filed a patent, particular for what we call a dual texture tourniquet, or our VersaKit. So that's our trademark name for it, right? And one side's smooth and one side's textured. And the whole idea is it gives the healthcare professional the option of being able to choose that one tourniquet for either application or their particular preference, right? It's amazing. We talk about healthcare professionals that do this all day long. They might be doing 200 blood draws a day or IV starts a day, depending on, where they're at. They know these, they pick it up. They can tell if it's too sticky or if it's too stiff, right? It's amazing. Like, they're just intrinsic muscle memory that they have by pulling these every time. Yeah, so we give them the option to be able to choose between dual textured, smooth, or textured. And purchasers like that as well, because they could say, well, we're just going to have one SKU, because then the healthcare professional can choose the textured side or the smooth side.
I love simplifying that for supply chain. And I'm even going to take this back to a really supply chain specific part of the conversation, which is the nearshoring. We really teed that up well. And I think it's really like a closing part of this conversation that's important. You've got over 3,000 healthcare customers currently today. And I love the family-owned part of this, right? We talked about that, the culture of that. But it allows you to be nimble. But it also, the nearshoring aspect really does solve a lot of concerns in supply and demand and how quickly you can turn that around. And if there is a shortage and it's manufactured in another country, chances are that country is experiencing the shortage and they're going to prioritize meeting local demand before they meet an international demand for supply. So I do like this. And I want to talk more about the benefits of nearshoring, especially as we address these supply shortages that seems like back orders, et cetera, have just plagued supply chain over the last 2+ years.
Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, they started this journey about 7 years ago, and it comes out of their entrepreneurial nature, the owner's nature of, well, why couldn't we figure out how to do this? And so 7 years ago, they embarked on this journey of working with a consultant to develop their own machinery, develop their own recipe for the raw materials that need to go into these tourniquets to make them have the correct amount of stretch or the correct amount of stickiness, if you want to think it that way. And so it's been quite a journey to get to the point that we're at. And, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And we were lucky. We have our equipment here in our facility. We have our raw material suppliers here sourced from the United States, right? Everything is contained and now we're vertically integrated. So we don't have a 3-month timeline. That might be an exaggeration. I'll just say 8 weeks, right? From the time that we would place an order with a overseas manufacturer by the time we would receive the product. Now, we've improved our time lag from the time something's manufactured to the time we're able to get it to our customers. So we've shortened that up. We've shored up our supply chains because now they're contained within the United States. It allows us also to have a better quality control of the product as well, right? I mean, what we're getting, like if we order something from overseas with a manufacturer that we've worked with, like I said, it may take 8 weeks to get to us. Well, that might be inventory that they had at their facility that gets shipped to us, right? So that inventory could be a couple months old. So we could have something that's 4 months old, for example, before we're even able to ship it out to a customer. So if there were a quality issue with a tourniquet, it's very difficult to track back down the root cause with the manufacturer to figure out what caused that, right?
And the manufacturer could get an influx of orders, and they're not necessarily as well equipped to predict the type of volume fluctuations that are coming in. Whereas because you're manufacturing and delivering direct to your customer base, you just brought on a new customer, very likely just from part of the sales process, you understand what that increase in volume looks like. So not only do you have the quality control and the ability to go back more quickly and adeptly to reduce waste and to create a more efficient, process for quality control and improvement, but you also get to prepare for volume increases in a much more controlled manner as well. So less surprises for you, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? I mean, companies talk about being vertically integrated all the time and having all their raw materials on site and being able to control every aspect of their production process. And all the reasons that you just mentioned are the reasons why it just makes sense for us. Now, we've also added an incredible amount of automation into our tourniquet line so that we can scale with demand, right? And not have to add more people or more equipment to deal with that demand. So it just makes sense. And like I said, I think we were lucky rather than good in the aspect of, foreseeing that the pandemic was going to hit and the supply chain challenges that came along with it. So,
all right. So you're a family-owned business. I'm assuming that means, and I'm just going to say this, but I'm assuming in my experience, that means great customer service. And so can you talk about customer service? And also, if you're shipping from inside the U.S., I'm assuming shipping times are much faster as well.
Yeah. So I'm going to take a step back and just talk about our owners a little bit and the core values that they bring into the organization. I've worked in a couple of different large companies in my history, and a lot of them will talk about, customer service, or we care about our employees, and to an extent that's true, right? Our owners live and breathe our core values, and I've never been in a company that's as unique as this one from that perspective. And that bleeds all the way through the organization to our customers. We changed our name from Platinum Code to Caresfield because of those core values. It aligns with our core values and aligns with the industry that we're in, right? It's about care. It's about care of the patient. It's about care of the customer. And so, during the pandemic, a lot of distributors that are larger put their customers on allocation, and they only serviced their largest customers. Caresfield didn't. We were able to stay ahead of the demand, and we didn't have to put customers on allocation, and we were able to service those. And in general, our mentality and our owner's mentality is we're going to do right by the customer no matter what. And accountability is a large part of that. It's one of our core values. If we mess up, we're going to take care of it. It doesn't matter the reason why, right? And we're going to make sure our customers are taken care of during that whole process. It's all, nearshoring, like you said, also allows us to be able to ship very quickly to customers. What we say is if we have the product in stock, we'll ship it same day as order, as long as it's received by 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, I believe. So, and that's all continental U.S. We don't ship outside of the United States. We do ship to all of the United States, but nothing to Canada or outside of the United States. So,
all right. So this seems like a great place to bring in some comments from your customers. We just got done talking about customer service, so let's hear it from the customer. The first quote I have is best prices on gloves, and we love the rainbow of tourniquets. This is from Tina L. She's a purchasing agent in a health group in Missouri. And then another one, the relationship has always been very, very easy with Caresfield. It's just not an operational job that they do for us. They take care to understand each client's need and make sure that there is a personal relationship vested. Again, that goes back to those family values, small business. I love it. That's from Ryan W., a supply chain analyst in a hospital in Ohio. Nick, you want to kind of add any color commentary to those two quotes?
You know, Tina and Ryan are both touching on how this company and how its employees operate. They really do put customers first. And I've had the opportunity to go and work directly with customers when they've had a concern about any one of our products. And I get on site and talking with them, and the feedback typically is we've never had a vendor come out and talk to us about our tourniquets or our labels, right? And it really comes back to the core values that Ron, Steve, and Marty and their father Warren have instilled in this company, and they live and breathe and demonstrate every day. It's great to hear those comments back from our customers, because it just, you know, it makes us feel good to know that we're doing right by the customer and taking care of them.
Yeah, it's not just customer service, it's personalized service. For sure. All right, last quote here. This is from Carl H., a lab director at a hospital in Alabama. He says, as a conscientious lab director, I am always on the lookout for a company that excels in customer service, provides a fair market price for their products, and makes an overall commitment to their customers. I really do enjoy conversing with them, since their vernacular seems to genuinely pull at my heartstrings with a touch of sincerity, concern, and downright honesty. We have all heard the statement, if they could be more like such and such. Well, this is the company that should be cloned and used as a model performer when it comes to overall customer satisfaction. I got to tell you, Nick, I've read a lot of sort of testimonials on these vendor spotlights before. This is probably the most glowing one I've ever read.
Yeah. I mean, that's because Carl's my best friend and he wrote that for us. No, I don't know who Carl is, honestly. I know, like, I just keep harping on it. It really comes back to the core values of the company and the leadership that's been demonstrated here. And the labels are one of the things that we provide, right? It's a label. Like, it's nothing, like, it's just a label. But for the healthcare professional or the tourniquet, it's just a rubber band. For the healthcare professional, it's important, right? It's either that patient's information, or that it sticks on, or the label sticks on the blood tube, or that the tourniquet doesn't tear the patient's skin, right? Or it doesn't break. And it allows them to do their job and provide the care to the patient themselves, you know. And we look for partners both with our customers and any other consumables that we manufacture that align with those core values, because, you know, at the end of the day, when we have a need that we have to go out and work with raw material suppliers, we want to find a supplier that aligns with those core values, because when we say, hey, we need this material because it's serving healthcare industry, they jump on it with us, right? They have that same mindset. We're going to take care of our customer. We're their customer. And then, you know, obviously the healthcare industry is our customers. So it's prolific through the organization. It doesn't matter if we're the one manufacturing or we're working with a raw material supplier, right, to get that in. We want to have that alignment through and through.
All right. Well, we're going to tell everybody how they can get more information. I got a couple of web links for you. You can go to www.caresfield.com, or specifically related to this podcast, info.caresfield.com/power supply. And I believe you have some free samples for them. How can they get those?
Right. So there's a couple ways you can get free samples. First is you can go to our website and do the request right online. You can do an online chat and request them that way as well. We also have local sales reps across the U.S. That you can contact directly. We're very adamant that any sample a customer requests, that we send it to them free of charge, and we get it to them. Usually, if we get it in the morning, we usually get out the same day. So within a business week, that individual has it. So one of the things I want to go back to real quick is our customer service. And you can call us. You're going to get a live person. I don't know if, Justin, you've ever watched The Office before. I don't know if we can even talk about this.
I live in Pennsylvania. Of course I have.
So there's an episode in there where Jim and Dwight are at a customer site and they want to show Dunder Mifflin's customer service and how great it is. And they're with the customer. Dwight calls their competitor and Jim calls Dunder Mifflin. And one goes to an automated voicemail and the other one goes to a person immediately, picks up the phone, knows the individual by name. And that's honestly how our customer service is in our facility here in Lakeville, Minnesota. And Amy, Tegan, Brittany, they are the ones answering the phones. They know our customers by name. They know their account numbers. I mean, it's just amazing the level of service that they provide given, the large number of customers that we have. So we really try to bring that personal touch, regardless if somebody's calling for samples or an order or whatever it might be.
Well, one last piece of additional value, too, and I do want to encourage all the listeners, if they're calling in for free samples or they're going to place an order, their first order, to mention that you heard about Caresfield on the Power Supply podcast, but you can get 10% off your first order, not valid on any GPO contracted items, but definitely want to throw that out there, Nick, if you want to kind of add anything else before we wrap up the interview here in a minute.
No, that aligns exactly with what we had talked about. That if you call in, if you're a new customer, you're getting 10% off that first order with us, and then you'll be a Caresfield customer for life because we're going to take care of you.
Excellent, Nick. Fantastic job on this interview today. And really, I love hearing about your culture. I love hearing about customer service. And I love hearing about not having to put customers on allocation during the pandemic and being able to meet that supply because you're really doing all that quality control and nearshoring the manufacturing of your products. So really nice job and a great story to tell everybody out there in the listening audience today.
Well, thanks, Justin. It's been awesome talking with you guys today and just having an opportunity to share our story a little bit.
That was Nick Fruge, VP of Operations at Caresfield, and we're talking about a U.S.-based manufacturer. And I know we spent much of the conversation talking about disposable tourniquets, but as Nick mentioned, they also manufacture labels, patient ID bands, cohesive bandages, a variety of specimen collection products, and gloves. And I love the fact that they didn't have to put customers on allocation. And the customer service piece, I mean, as we heard from some of their customers as we read those testimonials towards the end, getting somebody live, like you're calling into the office in Scranton, is, I think, really an important piece of customer service. Nobody has the time to be sitting on hold and waiting to get free samples and to consider placing an order. I mean, obviously you can go onto websites and there's lots of ways to place orders, but if you're going to consider a new supplier, you're going to want this level of customer service. So I want to encourage everybody to visit their website, caresfield.com, or specifically related to this podcast, you can go to info.caresfield.com/power supply. They have free samples. And if you don't want to talk to somebody live, you can still connect with somebody live by going to the website and engaging in a live chat. And then you can also call them directly. That's going to do it for this vendor spotlight. As a reminder, you can help support Power Supply by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. You can also find us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or simply search for the Power Supply podcast on your favorite podcast application. For some of these episodes, we've got bonus content, but to access that, you have to download our smartphone app for iPhone or Android. And while you're there in the App Store, we'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. Thank you for listening to this Vendor Spotlight on Power Supply.